everybody. Coming to you from the heart of Storm Eunice. Hopefully you'll be joining us later for the podcast. We'll catch you later. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Unily Podcast. So good to be back with all our avid watchers again. Today's topic, we'll be talking about the future of internal comms in 2022. But before we hop into it and get into all the kind of insights that our various teams across the Unily business have to share on that topic, let's catch up with our panelists today. So we're joined by a number of familiar faces and some new people. Let's go over to Kaz Hassan first. Kaz, how are you? Good to have you back.
Hi Matt, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. First podcast of the year for you, I believe.
Yes, I've been on a bit of a hiatus, so hopefully I'm back in the swing of things. How's your start of 2022 gone so far? It's been good. It's been a bit of a whirlwind. Well, there's a storm here at the moment, so poor choice of words, but yeah, it's been good, busy.
Speaking of the storm, I mean, what do you think of the name, Eunice?
I actually always like the names that they give them. They're always quite like sweet and endearing, and then you see like someone be blown over on the road, and you're like, oh, not that sweet and endearing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I only found out the other day that apparently they provide like a name for a storm for each letter of the alphabet, and then as each storm hits, they just get the pre-assigned name for A, B, C, D, E over the course of the year. Eunice, I don't know, Eunice has been okay so far for me. I had a small power outage earlier in the day, but I was still able to get out on the routine dog walk, which wasn't too bad. A few tractors out clearing fallen branches. But I mean, going over to another veteran podcaster, Glenn Chambers, I mean, the US is pretty well known to have some big storms. How have things been over there?
I'm looking out at blue skies and sunshine here in Austin, Texas. Nothing too bad this year. We had some snow and ice, which my 10-year-old then thought it'd be fun to try and push off the car, and scratched up all my Tesla, which is about 4 months old. So I'm not very pleased with her, but that's the biggest weather story I've got. No, it's pretty sunny for most of the time.
Well, I appreciate your commitment to helping the environment with that electric vehicle, Glenn. Hopefully that will reduce the number of severe storms we're getting over here in the UK.
There you go. Do your bit. Do your bit.
Okay. Right, before we go any further on that controversial topic and start talking about harvesting lithium for batteries, let's go over to our first time podcast. David Conklin, who's having his first time on the Unily Podcast. David, welcome. It's so good to have you with us. How are you doing?
Not bad. Wonderful to be here. Thanks, Matt. Good
to have you with us. David, perhaps for the benefit of our regular podcast fans, you could tell us a little bit about your role at the Unily business.
Sure.
What it is you do.
So I'm a senior customer success manager here at Unily. I work with some of our larger enterprise clients, and I've been here about just under 2 years.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Good stuff. I mean, so you should be no stranger now to these kind of recorded presenting opportunities, because you played a pretty significant role at Unite 21, didn't you?
Yeah.
Hosting Johnson & Johnson, one of Unily's biggest customers. What was that like?
It was really fun. So I've worked with Johnson & Johnson almost my entire time here at Unily. They are just a great client. I'd like to consider them sort of the gold standard of what a customer at Unily can be. And really, it's actually, I guess, a testament to them and the way that they run their environment and what they do with it. That ever since that keynote speech that I helped do with Ping Chow over at Johnson & Johnson, who was running the project there for them at the time. Ever since that time, it's just been nonstop. We want to do what Johnson & Johnson's doing. Just tell me how they handle it. I mean, not just at Unily, but amongst all the rest of the customers that, at least among our team, people are always asking me, my customer saw you and Johnson & Johnson at Unite. can you tell me how they're doing this? So it's been great. Working with them has been really just like educational and just sometimes inspiring, because the way that they like run their environment, the way they run their team, is just like so highly organized, highly efficient, and they just do amazing things with the technology. It's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think plenty of people will be very jealous. You took the accolade of one of Will Saville, our CEO's favourite sessions of Unite, which he attested to live. I was pretty disappointed I didn't get that, but share the glory, share the limelight.
Next year, there's always next year.
Snatch the crown for top session of Unite maybe there, which is fantastic. That must have been quite a learning curve as well. You said that it was kind of a learning experience. It must have been quite the learning curve to work with such a large organization for yourself.
Well, I mean, the great thing about them is, if you want to consider it deep end and being thrown in it, for sure, that was definitely one way to look at it. But I mean, the cool thing about Johnson & Johnson is that they, I know I mentioned that they're organized, but I don't know if I can really express how organized these guys are. I mean, like every meeting that we have is just highly organized and in a good way. Like we come away from it with like action items, with things that we want to achieve. We work together. It's a true, real partnership in the way that we work together. It's not like they come to me with complaints and they want me to go fix them. We sit, we talk about how we're going to achieve the goals that we have together. It's the learning curve was, there's a learning curve to everything, but for them, it wasn't like there wasn't like an option to fail, in the sense that they weren't going to let me, really. Working with them it's just been really educational.
Awesome. That's really cool. And of course, now that you're on the podcast, this is helping to secure your speaking role at Unite 22 as we start to firm up plans for that. Cool. Stay tuned, people. I'm sure the podcast will be the first to know about it when it's planned in. Now, I guess at this point, it'd be good to jump into today's topic. Let's talk about the future of internal comms. I think that, we have already discussed a great deal over the podcast in 2021, the kind of rise of importance of internal comms during the global pandemic, the increased pressure and demand for deliverables from the internal comms team, maybe an increased sense of ownership of the overall digital employee experience. But of course, 2022 heralds new challenges and new opportunities. So, Glenn, coming over to you first, what can you tell us about your thoughts and opinions on the future of internal comms?
As soon as the clock changes and we get from December 21 to 22, I mean, it doesn't change like wholesale, right? I think that it's a continuation of the themes from last year around remote work, being, I hate the phrase, but the new normal, right? It's not going away. Hybrid working, a focus on employee burnout, right? So making sure that corporate communications are helping employees not, to know what their limits are and not to work 12-hour days when you're in that hybrid work scenario, because I think that studies have shown people are working more, not less, which was originally the fear. I also think like some of these topics are spilling over from our last podcast, but leadership, making sure that they have got a direct contact with all their employees, a channel to get to all of them via corporate comms to talk about the direction of the company, what they're doing in 22, priorities. I think they're the things. And I also, the thing that I've seen a huge sort of uptick in general comms and interest, because I'm in sales teams, so talking to customers, is around D&I initiatives, diversity and inclusion and accessibility. And I think that we're seeing a sort of mashup and blending of social issues that people have in their own lives outside of work. It used to just not be discussed, and now it seems to be like that it's always discussed, whether it's Black History Month now, like all corporations are having putting a spotlight on that in their internal organization and showing them that they're aligned with those values. So there's some starting points. How was that?
Well, let's pick out one in particular, and there's one that I'm very interested in from an internal comms perspective, which is around leadership. And I think one of the most interesting dynamics there is that in a lot of other communications, you talk kind of in a more abstract sense about the business or its vision or mission or how you've achieved X, Y, Z goal. Whereas when we talk about leadership comms specifically, we are, or the royal we as internal communicators are trying to present personality as well as messaging. You're kind of trying to be the face of someone important to the business who people trust. So it's kind of like an extra layer of abstraction, and an extra challenge really, which isn't just to deliver the message, but also to, present that individual in both a positive and a meaningful way. Do you think that internal communicators have had enough time over the course of the pandemic to kind of get close to that challenge, overcome it, and really deliver leadership messaging in better ways?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe the remote work side of things might have helped that, because previously a leader would have been probably stood up on a podium, and maybe it would have been recorded from quite a far distance away and would have been very well rehearsed and scripted. I think maybe now, because of the pandemic, they're like, now we're doing a town hall, we have our own, right, internally. Going to switch to the CEO. He's right there. Often they're sitting in their house, right? So you see a little bit about themselves and their personality shining through. Previously, maybe they're suited and booted, and now they're much more casual. I think possibly there's a greater chance to highlight the personality, and people do work for leaders, right? So having that opportunity to present yourself as a human and a leader and share some little bits about who you are and why you should care is critical. I also think from a Unily perspective, we've seen a lot of customers. If the CEO's called Chuck, it'd be like Chuck's Corner or Chuck's Voice or whatever it is, whether it's a newsletter or a part of the intranet, it's sort of making it a bit more, hip's not the right word, but casual and, light-hearted rather than very formal. But obviously with a formal message, right? Here are the strategic, here are the things that we're worried about for this year, and here are the things I want you to focus on, and here are our metrics and our goals, and so there is an important messaging behind it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. David, on the point of leadership comms, what can you tell us? Well, let's use Johnson & Johnson. What can you tell us about how clients are tackling leadership communications, and how do you think that's going to shape or further change in 2022?
Well, it's really funny hearing the things that Glenn talks about, because I see that, not just at Johnson & Johnson, but like several of my other clients, ranging in size, really, from smaller sort of firms all the way up to very, very large ones. Everyone is doing that, and I've seen it. By the time I got involved, we were sort of like we were already several months into the pandemic, so I think they had already developed that strategy and they sort of refined it over the last, say, year and a half. And it's, what are you doing? You're humanizing your leadership, right? You're making them somebody who's right in front of you, and as you've been adjusted to intake this type of media, this type of content, it's something you're much more likely to watch now, as opposed to in the past. I know, speaking from personal experience, like getting an email from a CEO when I was in an office and they were in an office on the other side of the country, I wasn't really going to watch that, or wasn't as likely to. Now it's a part of your daily media intake, because that's where you're most comfortable. You're at home, you're working there, and several of my clients have done a very, very good job about this, about just like hearing Glenn say that, it's like, oh, that's not Charles, that's Chuck. I actually have had this conversation with a client of mine where they referred to their CEO in a sort of in a very sort of friendly term of like a nickname of their first name. They do that. It's actually really happening. And I think clients that are doing that and doing it well are really achieving something that was unable to be achieved before the pandemic, if that makes sense. I think this has presented a really great opportunity to make people feel that even though they're further away, possibly in distance, you're much closer to that, like, or at least maybe feel like you're knowing that person. You are seeing them in their house, in a sweater vest as opposed to a suit. Yeah, it really does make sense. Yeah.
And the interesting thing there from both Glenn's point and yours is that you both talked about seeing them and watching them. So maybe I've misframed the challenge for internal communicators around leadership, because if you're going to put them on video, specifically when we talk about that format, then personal identity is more easily conveyed when you're not having to do it by written word, in the form of stories or articles that you might produce. So maybe the challenge isn't for internal communicators to be able to present personal identity through articles they're drafting on behalf of their leadership. Maybe the true challenge for internal communicators in 2022 is to get more of their leaders in front of the camera.
It's true.
Kaz, what do you think?
I actually totally agree with that point. And there's something David said there that reminded me, and this is where I think there's the trend is around is not just around leadership visibility, it's around displaying of the humanity of leadership, and it's the personality of leadership, the humanizing of it. And that's where I think that's where the trend is going. And I was reminded of something where an old company I used to work for, it was pretty much the first job I had when I came out of uni, so I was pretty fresh-minded. And I remember they did an annual employee survey, and one of the findings that came out of that employee survey was about visibility of leadership. Obviously, this is all pre-pandemic. And the way they chose to solve that problem was to set up small meetings with the CEO, and in smaller groups. And it would kind of be more casual, conversational. Around lunchtime, you'd bring your lunch and you'd chat with the CEO. And I remember going to that, and little me, basically, they opened up, started the conversation, and the first question I asked was because this was on a Monday, so I was like, how was your weekend? What did you get up to? And his response was, do you have any work questions? And I remember at the time being quite hit by that, because I was like, why didn't he pick up that? Because that for me was a great opportunity to start to humanize yourself. Whereas I wonder now, if that same scenario happened, he would then see it as an opportunity to humanize. So that's where I think the trend is going. It's not just about the visibility of the work they're doing and then providing updates on financials. It's about the humanizing of those people. And that's where things like video, seeing people in their homes with pictures and books and things like that starts to humanize it.
Actually, I have one little anecdote. Another client that I talked to, I remember they mentioned this, and it actually struck me, was one of the sort of benefits of a platform like Unily, where the CEO is, even if it's the content's being created for them, at least it's, technically coming from that. It creates this like an online identity for them that was, before having a tool like this, was completely impossible to have, right? Because you're only sending out official emails or things like this. People can interact with almost a personal brand that you're creating for this person, and that's important because of the way that you interact with it. And I remember one of my clients telling me this, that this is one of the things that they really like, because it's allowed them to exactly what you said, humanize some of the senior leadership in a way that they have not been able to in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And I think that, the human element has become increasingly important, especially when we look at that in the context of remote work and the increasing digitization of the work environment, because the human element is obviously being eroded by the distance that we have between ourselves, our co-workers, and even more distance arguably between ourselves and our leaders. I think the kind of leadership comms side of things is really helping to close that gap. But interestingly, Gartner did some research about communication priorities. And one of the things that came out as one of the top challenges that communicators were facing or believed they were going to face in 2022 was around employee fatigue, around communications. So in an effort to close that gap, it's almost like there's been an effort of kind of over communication, perhaps, where we've really tried to bridge the lack of physical workspace by being, communication heavy, and that has included that leadership comms piece within the full kind of spread of communication activity. But the flip side of that, of course, has been increased fatigue. So David, you talked about now more than ever you're more interested in kind of hearing or seeing what the leadership team have to say. Do you think in 2022 we can stay the course, communicate as much as we did in 2021 without kind of, having you switch off from reading the latest CEO blog?
Well, no, I think everybody agrees that quality is way better than quantity, for sure. I think people get excited about certain things that seem to be working, and then they'll overdo it. I think that's always something that you worry about. You don't want to overdo it, for sure. And I think communication fatigue is a very, very big thing. Just from what I'm seeing, at least from my clients, is they're very focused on quality of content and communications right now. That's really what their big is. I mean, if I had to pick the two big, priorities for the clients that I work with specifically this year, it's number one, and like a big number one is D&I. That's like all that anyone is focused on this year. That's the big one. But then also content and communication review. They want to make sure that we've seen, at least a lot of some of my clients have created vast amounts of content over the year or years or however long they've been with Unily or on their previous intranets. And they're taking a good hard look at it and seeing just how effective it is. And they want to make sure that they're not just making content and communications for making its sake.
Yeah, so when you say how effective it's been, they're creating a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion content, and it's been very effective. What do you think they mean by effective? Effective at engaging employees, or effective at actually tackling that issue within the organization, or both?
I would say engagement is probably the thing that they most care about. I mean, I think we have to be realistic with what you can achieve just from comms, right? I mean, you can make content on certain social issues, but I mean, is that actually solving the issue? Probably not. But what it's doing is it's raising awareness, and that's probably the main thing that you can get out of D&I content. And bear in mind, spread across the people that I work with and that I see otherwise, for D&I, some of them are actually just rolling out major initiatives this year. That's when they're doing it. So they're actually looking at past content that was created as far as like refining that. But then the D&I stuff that they're doing is actively being creative as major initiatives for release in 2022.
So when I talked originally about comms fatigue, you think that, the pace of comms will slow down, but what we're going to see is an increased focus on more meaningful kind of areas. So there'll be some areas that are maybe, being communicated more heavily about now that will continue to be communicated heavily about. But overall, you think the trend will be a slight reduction in overall comms traffic to increase focus on important areas?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's a sentiment that I've been picking up is that they want to, go back through their communications, strategies from the past, make sure that that they haven't been just over creating, and then moving forward, that their communications are more effective is exactly what they want to do. So monitoring the effectiveness of their communications. And I think that really, obviously, not a shameless self-plug here, but that definitely does dovetail really well with campaigns, obviously.
Yes.
Engagement, automated engagement, which is something our clients are very excited to start leveraging. But yeah, that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Okay, so let's stick with the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion for a moment. And I guess really the role of comms in 2022 is advocates for change, advocates for improvement within the organisation on topics like that? Anyone care to weigh in thoughts and opinions? Is it the responsibility of comms to kind of bring about that change through awareness and messaging?
I have an opinion on this.
Good. Weigh in, Kaz.
It's tricky because David spoke a little bit there about like putting stuff under the bucket of raising awareness, which I think is important. But I don't think that you can. I think that's a starting point. That's what I think. And obviously, I tend to look at this stuff from a quite techie perspective. And one of the things that, aside from that communicators can do, one thing that I think technology can provide people or help further the DE&I agenda comes from the opportunities you give employees as individuals to contribute to the conversation. So that can be through different channels. So that can be through blogging and giving an employee a voice where they can say, this is my experience. This is how I feel about this thing, and allowing people to have a conversation around that topic. Matt, you and I will know from working together, we often get to the best solution by challenging each other and kind of debating and telling each other our opinions. And I think at a broader level, that's another thing that we should want to see more of in 2022 is people being more open with their opinions, having good discussion around those as part of awareness and changing people's outlooks and opinions. But then the second part of it that I think is important is around identity. So we spoke about this with leadership. We said, okay, it's about seeing the humanity.
Yeah.
That doesn't just stop with leadership. It needs to filter all the way down, and people being able to portray who they are at work, where we might just now be working remotely, is also another big part of it. So people are going to want to put a stamp on their digital identity. And people have been used to doing this through social media. Like, I've got my Twitter bio, I've got my Instagram, which has an aesthetic. And it would be really weird now if I have this whole identity around me that I've crafted in social media and I get into work where I also have some sort of digital virtual identity and it's just bland. Like, that's just not me. So there needs to be a way for me to show who I am as well. So it's not just about this kind of top-down comms and creating articles and making financial contributions and charity events. Obviously, that is important, but you've got this bottom-up individual angle as well.
So I always find that to be an interesting one, especially when we talk about topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it is in my opinion, personally, it can be a difficult topic to talk about because no one wants to say the wrong thing. No one wants to cause upset or drama, even if they have, what would by general standards be considered your very good opinions on the topic and have their heart in the right place. I mean, sometimes there can be like pressure or fear around getting involved. Glenn, as somebody who actively participates in social communities like LinkedIn and things like that, from a work perspective with your personal profile kind of out there, what do you think about that? About how we encourage people to participate in the conversations, even those that are more challenging?
Well, I don't think you're ever going to get everybody participating, but that's not. 100% participation isn't necessarily the goal. I think it's about, as the Kaz and David talked about, starting the conversation, education, making people aware. Education, even if somebody does say something and then they need to be corrected, or it may not be with malice, it may have been, there's a learning moment, whatever they call it, right? So you can sort of, teachable moment, that's what I meant. So you can you can sort of tell this person, actually that's not right and here's why, and they can walk away. And then actually maybe like a bunch of other people might read that, have had the same thoughts, not been public about it, but then read and learn something different, and educates a lot more people.
Do you think that do you think it kind of falls to comms? to draw people into the discussion?
I think one of the reasons, apart from the reasons that have been discussed, that it's a big area is that we haven't really talked about the Great Resignation and all the hot job market and people bouncing around right now. And one of the reasons I think is that it's more than just a paycheck and job title, right? Sometimes people, maybe a few years ago, would have been comparing length of commute and stuff. But when you've taken that out and you're working from home, I think people want to feel pride about who they work for, right? So I work for a company that represents my values? And if you're not, then that concerns me and I might not be around. But I guess the other side of that is, maybe there's some organisations sort of jumping on the bandwagon a little bit, right? So I think it comes back to trust maybe and authenticity, and corporate comms have got to walk that line carefully about, leading the conversation about these important issues and where the company stands on them, but being authentic with it.
Yeah, see, and this is really interesting because this is kind of, one of the points I was making, it is a double-edged sword, right? So we saw this like skyrocket in importance or, value placed on the internal communications function, I would argue, over the course of the pandemic. And it feels like it maybe isn't slowing. And that actually, in our last podcast, Glenn, you talked about internal comms being under-resourced. I think the kind of things that they are now being seen as the guardians of or the voices of within the organisation are so huge. The pressure on internal communicators in 2022 seems like massive, right?
I mean, it's brand protection and the brand of a company. I guess historically, it's been about projecting the brand to your customers, right?
Yeah.
To make them, have an affinity for who you are and buy more of your product or service. I think the corp comms are taking on that task, but from an internal perspective for the employees.
Yeah, and that's it, right? Because I mean, the top priorities, again, going back to this Gartner research for their kind of they asked communication leaders what their top priorities were. 57% of the respondents stated that reputation management was now one of their top communication priorities. Evolve reputation management and brand protection through their kind of messaging, driving kind of a better reputation and building trust within the organization. That's like huge, especially when you talk about brand protection and you talk about brand protection in an external capacity. You look at marketing functions and they are huge, right? You look at some of the biggest brands in the world, their marketing teams probably make up 20% of their organization. And then you're saying to internal comms, who usually are teams of, what would you say, Glenn? 3, 4?
I don't know. I obviously when I'm trying to prospect a company, your search for internal comms job titles at companies, I mean, they are getting pretty huge.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen, for a 20,000 person company, I've seen like hundreds. When you're counting not only central corp comms, but like you might have HR comms and then different department comms and
they kind of like, would those be kind of like roles where it's like partly comms focused or pure comms individuals within the functions?
We're getting into, I don't know, different for every company, but I definitely think it's they can get pretty big.
Okay, interesting. Just because you would kind of expect them to be, when you're talking about, roles such as brand protection, you'd expect there to be more than just a handful of people responsible for that in large organizations. It's probably changed quite a bit since I was doing implementations, but I remember doing implementations pre-pandemic, what was it, 2018 maybe, and working with comm teams of 2 for organizations of 20,000.
Wow. Yeah.
So maybe that is being addressed. Maybe what we're seeing is increased resourcing for the function as the responsibilities rise. But the responsibilities seem huge. Like,
yep. I mean, David, do more with less, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, David, what can you tell us a little bit about Johnson & Johnson? I'm just going to lean into that angle because I know that you've worked so closely with them. Like, what's their comms team kind of like?
So, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I actually, like, their comms team is actually, or like their broader comms team is actually fairly removed from me. They have a team that only works on Unily, and that's represented from two different groups. And those guys are, it's sort of co-ran by two different departments or representatives from those different departments. And they provide the platform for the comms team. I know that the comms team is very large at Johnson & Johnson. I think that companies that are investing in their internal comms companies are the ones that are getting it right. Because to have a unified voice when you're expected to have a unified voice externally, it would be absolutely insane for me to say that a company would succeed if they had a bunch of different messaging out there in the world externally, but then internally we're expected not to have a clear internal voice. It's something that I'm seeing a lot more of investing in, and I feel like the companies that understand what the world has changed, how this messaging needs to get out, and how you need to have sort of just, it's not just reputation and identity. It's almost more like, it's more like your voice, and it's the voice that you speak to your employees. If you are a client, if you're a company that has clients, you need to have a unified voice from your company to your clients. And it's something that I feel like is if you're investing in it, you're doing the right thing. So I'm seeing that across a big section of customers that I know of and work with.
Yeah, because I mean, the reason I go down this resourcing path primarily is because, and this is only one piece of research that I'm talking about right now. But again, on that Gartner research, 61% of comms leaders stated that balancing short-term delivery against long-term strategy, so actually meeting the deliverables required in the short term and having the headspace to plan a long-term kind of vision for comms was their second highest priority, which leads me to believe that there's so much going on from a comms perspective just to meet the needs of the business right now that the kind of long-term vision isn't necessarily being they don't have the capacity to prioritize the long-term vision for that comms function. So that's kind of where I was going with that point. Maybe this is a good point to talk about how technology helps and aids that. I mean, Kaz, I'm going to come to you because obviously, you worked on engagement automation last year, but you've also got something in the bag at the start of this year. Can you talk to us a little bit about what role technology is going to play in helping communicators in 2022?
Yes, sure. So earlier we kind of spoke about the increase in communications, and I think over the past couple of years, put together leadership comms, people working more remotely, over time you've just dialed up extra communications that are going out in different channels, different types of communications. So you kind of see how a lot of companies have found themselves in a bit of a mess with just too much. And I think someone earlier mentioned the amount of noise that was coming. Ultimately, as a communicator, it's not just to communicate for the sake of communicating. You have certain goals that you're trying to reach. You have strategic projects or campaigns that you need to communicate out on. You have goals where you're trying to get your employees to engage with certain types of content, or you're trying to get them to understand something, or you're trying to make their employee experience better, whether that be through onboarding or whether that be through starting on a new piece of software in the company. There are so many of these sort of journeys that are happening. And obviously engagement automation was our start to trying to resolve that. So what we did with that project was say, okay, well, let's give communicators the power to plan out their communication campaigns step by step, know what channels they're hitting for what types of employees, let them understand how successful that was in getting employees to engage. And for us, the next iteration of that is, instead of the kind of one-to-many communication campaigns, we want to think about the individual employee and more personalized journeys. So from a technology perspective, what we're looking at doing this year is to build on that engagement automation technology and say, well, okay, you're a communicator, you're hiring, every day, every week, there's going to be new people starting. And you know that there's a journey that they're going to have to follow. They're going to have to sign off a document about acceptable usage. You're going to get to want them to understand what they can do on their platform, who they should be interacting with. Are there any social buddies that they can start to interact with to get immersed in the company? All these types of activities and actions are part of a more personalized flow. And what we want to do is allow communicators to take a step back and say, okay, well, what is the optimum, as an example, onboarding flow for a new employee? Plan that out, again, in a kind of more strategic timeline way, and then execute it so that anytime there's a new employee, you kind of automated that flow. You're ensuring that they're getting the right information, the right links to the right documents. If they haven't done something, they then get a personalized message to say, hey, we saw that you started this, but you really need to finish it off before you move on to the next thing. So from a technology perspective, we want to make those flows much more personalized, but staying on that theme of, from a technology perspective, allowing communicators to strategically plan what those flows are.
Yeah, and I think, hopefully the technology will enable communicators to deliver the kind of messages that they need to, but also, take a step back and be a little bit more strategic about their kind of long-term objectives, as you mentioned. So, I mean, the phrase that I've seen kind of floating about is kind of internal communicators need to start thinking more like marketers. Mm-hmm. Like, how true do you think that is in light of what we've talked about? Brand reputation seems to fall straight into supporting that statement, for example.
Yeah, I think that's very much true. I think there are many themes where the line between marketing and comms is starting to blur. From us, obviously, we're thinking from a technology perspective, but we spoke earlier about like the employer brand and authenticity. If you've got completely divided marketing team or recruitment team who's working on your employer brand, but then your communications team isn't connected to that and that isn't the reality, then you're going to get a disconnect, and that's not authentic. So that's another theme where you're starting to see that line blur. And I think, I think we'll see that line blur even more. And I think now that line blurs more, you're going to have the same expectations around technology, but also data. So marketers for a while have had KPIs, or that they will know how to successfully measure whether a marketing campaign was successful or not. They'll know how to report that information and that data upwards so that their leaders can then understand, okay, well, this worked, this didn't work. And perhaps communicators have not been held to the same standard, or perhaps haven't needed to, or haven't had the technology to do so. And where you get that blur, it only makes sense to have more standardized reporting so that people are looking at the same piece of information and understanding whether a campaign was successful or not successful, whether that was an internal campaign or an external campaign.
And, the thing that kind of sparks like that kind of realization for me as well is we talk about the proliferation of digital tools, which isn't necessarily a comms thing. You work remotely, you're going to need more systems to connect and collaborate, which is, a known thing. We've seen the number of tools we use every day rise. But it then also has made internal communicators think about communications in a kind of multi-channel kind of mindset. So the intranet is now, or the employee experience platform is one channel for communications, and there are many others that they can kind of leverage to nurture employee engagement, right? Recognizing that people don't just sit there waiting for the next news article to land on the internet homepage, but they're off in teams, on calls, collaborating on design documents, Word documents, wherever else it is. And how do you kind of slip things into the inbox, into their kind of collaboration systems that just kind of say, hey, when you've got a moment, check this out. And the thing that kind of brought that to mind was when David said about Johnson & Johnson, actually, the comms team aren't really a team I speak to anymore. There's a team that owns the employee experience platform, and it's like comms treat that as one channel, right? One channel by which they are, it's like an as a service thing. We provide it as a service to Johnson & Johnson, and then teams within Johnson & Johnson provide it as a service to the internal communicators. Hey, come use this channel for your comms, we'll manage it for you, etc. And that for me is a big change as well, right? Because I think, Glenn's probably one of the best people to talk to this, but I kind of was of the opinion that internal communicators were more and more owning this technology.
I think so, because going back, 5 years plus, the technology was just difficult, and it required developers and scripts to be run, and you normally had actually an embedded, it wasn't unusual to have an embedded technical person in the comms team. They would write the stuff and sort of give it to this person, and it's at a basic level, we're writing sort of custom HTML and stuff like that, and styles, and to make it look like that. I think as it's got easier, and more maybe marketing grade, as you said, that it enables, intelligent communicators who are great business people, but maybe, not developers. They don't need to be developers, right? They can do a lot. They're empowered to do a lot more with the skills that they have. So it doesn't. I think that definitely pushed more into the comms sphere because they were able to do it.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm just thinking, now back to our original question, what kind of challenges do you think lie ahead? We talked a little bit about leadership visibility, maybe a little bit touched on the kind of comms resourcing side of things and increasing responsibility. And, to a certain extent as well, we kind of touched on the tackling of difficult topics. Any other kind of big challenges, that we think are going to be important in 2022 for internal comms?
I think the only thing we haven't touched on in a lot of detail would have been the burnout and employee wellness, and
huge.
Communicating to employees about the benefits they have, about flexibility to step away from your desk for a bit, to turn off notifications and not get bothered at every non-working hour and at weekends and things like that. I think that's the other thing that employees are demanding, and comms teams have to corporate comms has to communicate, what's available and what's around.
Do you think that comes back to the topic about maybe comms potentially being able to reduce the amount of outbound, send fewer
Yeah, I was
messages?
thinking about that, about my customers I speak to, because normally when a lot of customers that or prospects, when they come to me, they've got a serious challenge, right? So some of the challenges are, you dig a bit, but what are you doing today? And some prospects are sending out a daily email, right? And this thing's like pages and pages, and it's just text, and it's like not personalized at all. Everybody gets the same one, and you've got to try and flick through this thing and find the one piece of information that like possibly is really important to you. So sending out that, it's just inefficient, and it's just I guess a lack of keeping up to date with technology and what you can do with targeting and personalization. I've also seen customers have, like they in this one particular company, they had internal comms, and they were sending out internal comms content, and then they had other content in this other team, and they used different systems at a different email provider and had like different branding, and they sort of like had a loose agreement where they would send emails on like a Monday and a Wednesday, and then these people would send it on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and it's not surprising to me when they're getting bombarded with these different messages for different, they look different, they've got a different style, different tone of voice. I can see it leading to confusion. But back to what David was saying earlier about quality over quantity, right? And they're obviously not measured. Half the time they don't have the ability to measure, right? It's not, they'd like to, but they can't even tell how many people are reading it, or they're just sending it into the ether and really just hoping.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, so maybe the answer, maybe I'm coming at it all wrong. It wouldn't be the first time.
It's the second time you've said that.
So hey man, the podcast is all about a learning experience.
Here we go.
So a learning moment, as you said earlier. So perhaps it's not a volume thing. Maybe it's just about cutting out the noise. I wonder if, so like when you're publishing comms in like a modern intranet or employee experience platform, frequently a feature is being able to specify who a piece of comms is for. It's for this audience. Maybe what we should be advocating for internal communicators in 2022 is to ban the everyone group, right? You can no longer send comms and just say, this is for everyone. You have to be more specific. You've got to choose who messages are for so that we can tackle the challenge of, the employee fatigue, knowing that the systems they have nowadays will very easily allow them to find other comms that they maybe haven't read yet, right? You think is that a controversial, proposal for internal communicators?
I agree with that. I do think, though, the fatigue burnout thing is more than comms noise. I think it's people wanting to work for companies that care about them as individuals and respect their flexibility and their schedules and their family and how they feel, which I think perhaps maybe thought that was like a pandemic fad, which was, we did this shift and we're operating in unusual, unprecedented times, as people would say. And I think people thought that perhaps that would die down. I don't think that is. So I think part of it is like the noise, but I think part of it is quite feeling focused. Like I've got younger siblings who are firmly in that Gen Z category, and they will know people who take mental health days from school and well-being days and go to well-being webinars. And we're talking about like children here, and obviously that's the next generation, but that's the sort of standard that we tend to be working to. Like even at Unily now, we have, today we had a promoted webinar, which was well-being focused from a previous Olympic champion. And that expectation, I think, is what people will continue to have throughout the year is, does my company actually care about me? What are they doing to support me, not just in my role to functionally get my job done, but me as an individual and how I think and feel?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. It's bigger than comms. I guess, trying to find some way to provide communicators with the golden bullet that's going to help them navigate that challenge in 2022 is a real challenge. So I guess there's one final topic that I think it would be good to turn to at this point as well, because I see the time is quickly running away from us. One of the big topics, again, and this goes back to the Gartner research, other research organizations are available, is measurement. How do you track the impact of comms? We talk about this all the time, but, it still continues to plague many organizations that, they're working with the bare minimum, like number of people who viewed a page, which is not a true measure of how someone felt when they read that story, what kind of opportunity they had to communicate with the company about its position on a given topic. What can we say about kind of measurement in 2022? I
actually think that reams, like having no analytics is terrible, right? Having just metrics on everything also isn't always useful if you've got to dig through it to gain insight. So I think that what I would like to see, even for our own product, is just this continued push towards this happened, this is what it means, this is what we recommend you do. right? So turning data into insight, into recommendations, or even, AI, or just taking some kind of corrective action or something for you, completing the flow.
Yeah.
And I'll freely admit I don't know how to do that, but I'm just going to drop it there. And
Well, I mean, this is, if you ask anybody on certain parts of the product team, they're probably tired of me talking to them about this. But this is, I mean, it's important insights, right? But I mean, what we were talking about earlier is actually really important here. Internal communicators acting like external marketers. Mm-hmm. External marketers have known how to measure this for a long time, right? We're talking about sentiment. We're talking about how you measure that. It's not an easy thing to get, but we know how to measure the effectiveness of the message that comes out of an advertisement. Mm-hmm. So it's an easy thing. It's in theory, it's easy to apply towards anything, right? Any sort of message that you're putting out there. The only difference is your conversion rate isn't the fact that you've went and clicked on something and then went and bought that thing, right? You're not selling a product, you're selling the information that you have that you're trying to get across, and then the sentiment that you want them to understand or feel. And I think if anything, this idea of internal communicators becoming more like external marketers to get their ideas across is a very, very important idea, and I think everybody can really get on board with that. And I think I know I speak for all of my clients when they say that they definitely want to see analytics tools that allow us to measure more than just events that have happened around content, but they want to measure more nuanced data that comes with every sort of action. I mean, somebody clicking on a page does not equal them uptaking that information and then also processing it and then having it sort of influence their behavior. It's a difficult thing to do, but I think if it's something that we even move 1 inch on the dial towards, I believe people will really appreciate that.
Sounds good. I certainly agree. I think sentiment especially is a really powerful tool for internal communicators. And I think the other thing is I think the technology is within reach. That's the other thing, we talk about the challenges that internal communicators are going to face in 2022. I think the tools are out there. And I think that investment in the right kind of technologies is going to help internal communicators to overcome a lot of these challenges, whether it's, being able to automate some of your comms work so you can think more strategically and more long-term and alleviate some of that pressure, whether it's measuring true engagement, true employee engagement with comms and understanding the sentiment of different messaging, whether it's empowering the employee voice, which, I don't think is a purely comms specific topic. We all have a responsibility to create safe spaces within our environment, within our working world, where people can talk about different topics and share opinions and engage with each other. All of these kind of tools exist now. And it is really and this is why it's a double-edged sword, right? I talked at the start about internal communications and this increased pressure, this continuing to amass more and more responsibility within the organization, which is kind of a burden to the communicators, but also feel like we're almost on the cusp of internal comms technology really mirroring what we see in the consumer world, or at least catching up in leaps and bounds with what we've seen in the consumer world now, to give them the kind of tools they need to be the most effective that they can be. Well, dare I say it, running out of time, but as always, I think it's good for us to all share a little something that we've learned over the course of the call. Kaz, you've been quiet for too long, my friend. I'm coming to you first. What have you learnt today?
I'd say that actually the analytics angle at the end for me was quite interesting.
Fresh in your mind.
It is. The sentiment analysis stuff, I think, where we spoke a little bit about how marketers like that line blurring between them. I perhaps haven't thought about how many different places that line would blur, from a technology perspective, from a communication perspective, communicators having to communicate in a smarter, more kind of marketized personalized way, visibility with leadership, how much that line's blurring, standardization of analytics and insights and feeding that back up. I think we've always spoke about marketing grade tools or technology for communicators, but obviously that has a knock-on impact to every other part of that communications role. So it'd be interesting to see what other challenges and opportunities that might bring in the year ahead.
Yeah, good one. It is a good point. David, I'm going to come to you next. What have you learned from today's podcast?
I learned that Glenn's middle name is John. That was big for me, real big. Let's see. The hearing some of. To be honest, thinking about about internal communicators acting like external marketers was just something that I've thought about in the past, but it didn't really click for me until we started talking about it in depth like that, and I think hearing that and hearing the way that our internal communicators that we work with can need to get their messages across in that sort of way, they got to sell it. It was just a sort of a different sort of way of thinking about it for me. So yeah, that's just a new way of thinking, really.
Nice, very good. Yeah, it is. I think it is an interesting shift. It's a really interesting shift. There used to be a much stronger delineation, I think, between those kind of mindsets, but that gap is closing, as far as I can tell anyway. Glenn, over to you. What did you learn today?
I need to get some really cool uplighting going on. I don't know whether you're getting a tan at the same time as you're leading the podcast or whatever. But
wait till you see the phone angle that you cut to. There's a lot of pink everywhere, all over this side.
That looks good.
Thank you very much. Seriously. I thought no one commented. I was like, look how cool I look. A very tech age kind of.
Yeah, sort of a bit X-Men. Two-Face from Batman.
That was the look I was going for. Two-Face from Batman, horribly disfigured.
All right. I think that what I learned was around the blurring of the lines, right, between the social agenda that's going on and their expectations in their lives and from their employer, right? I think more than ever people are activists, and they won't stand for. Or they'll stand up for things they believe in, and they won't stand for things that aren't in line with that, whether it's in their personal lives or in the workplace. And corp comms has to play a role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. What did I learn? Well, plenty, as per every podcast. I learned a lot chatting to all of you. I think that I was really interested in the multiple points we touched on about kind of comms team size, really, more than anything. It's because, Glenn, you speak to, and David, you speak to a lot more customers and companies about their comms team, the shape, the size, the way they're growing, how they're investing. We never even touched on the importance of investing in internal communication skills, right? There's a real skill set there that's kind of evolving and all the rest of that, which we'll save for another podcast now. But it's really interesting just to hear the frontline stories. What's the shape of the comms team? How are they working in different organizations, different sizes? What kind of size of comm teams are you kind of engaging with, Glenn? And, how they're kind of divvying up the huge responsibilities that we see, manifesting within their organizations. So, as always, great chatting to you guys. If you've been with us all the way through to the end, thank you. We're always glad to have you with us. If you're looking for more great content, check out unily.com. You'll find case studies, internal communications guides, lots of other helpful material, I'm sure, which will help you refine and shape your comms strategy for 2022. And for now, we'll say goodbye, but hopefully we will see you on the next one. Thank you very much, everyone.